A quick introduction, my name's Paul. I'm one of the partnership leads over at Publica. Some housekeeping before we kick off the conversation. We have made some time today for some questions at the end of the session. So if there is anything that you'd like to put to any of the panelists, please feel free to do so via the Q&A mechanic on Zoom. We have aimed for 45 minutes today, but we have got an hour booked in should the Q&A run longer than planned. Again, we will try to get through all of the questions at the end. If we can't, we will follow up with everybody, rest assured. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and let Ben kick off the session.
All right, thanks, Paul. And thanks everyone for joining. Today we'll be talking about people-based targeting in connected television. So based on the number of signups we've had for this webinar, I think it's something that a lot of people are interested in. And I think we've got some great people here today on the webinar to talk about this. So without further ado, I'll just start by introducing myself. So I'm Ben, I'm one of the co-founders of Publica. I am also the Chief Product Officer. I will hand it off to Naiqu for your intro.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and super happy to be on the panel with everybody here today. I'm on the product team at LiveRamp, and my specific domain is around advanced TV activation.
Cool. Thank you. Mike?
Yep, super excited to join as well. My name is Mike O'Neill. I'm Director of Programmatic Sales for Scripps CTV portfolio. I'll be coming at the panel from the angle of the publisher and monetization practices.
Awesome. Thank you both very much. And we're going to be talking a lot about tech and products, and we'll be presenting the Publica and LiveRamp partnership extensively. But maybe before we get into that, Mike, could you maybe give a quick intro of E.W Scripps, what you guys do in the CTV space? I think that'd be really helpful for a lot of attendees today.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to do that. Scripps is a venerated US publisher with 140 plus years in navigating the media landscape, so to speak. You know, we produce trusted news and information as well as entertainment across multiple channels, including linear TV, desktop, mobile, and OTT/CTV. I think for today's panel, we'll be focusing on Scripps' CTV monetization plan and kind of what we do around our leading brands. I'll be speaking to Newsy, which is the leading nonpartisan news net in CTV. I'll be speaking to Scripps Local, which is our owned and operated portfolio of 60 plus TV stations around the country. Those TV stations have live streaming apps of local news, weather, sports, to which we're affiliated with ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CW, et cetera. So that's covering 40 plus DMAs. We also have an audience extension tool called Newsy Brief. Simply put, we take Newsy's award-winning content and blast that out as an ad opportunity adjacency across a number of OTT apps as well as OEM partnerships. And then we have two entertainment assets. One is Court TV, which is gavel-to-gavel coverage of pivotal U.S. court cases, and then Bounce TV, which is an African-American targeting channel and network. So ultimately rounding out our CTV portfolio of 1.7 billion monthly avails.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. And it's really great to have you on the panel today because I think from your experience in the CTV space, we have so much to learn. And also from your experience in the audience extension space with things like Newsy Brief, I think it's everything that you guys do is just so fundamental to everything we're going to talk about. So it's really great to have you on. And without further ado, we'll get started into the product and what we're going to be talking about today, which is audience-driven TV advertising. So I guess just for a quick intro, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but we thought it'd be important to just make sure that we kind of clarify what we're talking about. Connected TV really is just data-driven television. That's what we're talking about today. thing that excites me most about this, this medium is that it is a revolution driven by viewers. Viewership is shifting from cable to internet connected devices. This year, we're starting to see CTV devices have a larger footprint than cable operated devices. So I think it's just incredible to see in real time a shift this massive that's driven by users. The second part that's really important and exciting is that all of the targeting capabilities that we have on the web are now available on TV. And I think just saying that for anyone that's been in the space for a long time is just, there's a massive opportunity there, because TV is obviously an essential part of any marketer's plans. But now that you're bringing that the targeting capabilities of web into that premium environment, I think the opportunities are endless. CTV is also a unique way to measure ROI for advertisers. I think historically TV has been one of those mediums where you just spend large budgets, try to raise your brand awareness, but it's very difficult to know exactly what's your return on investment. With connected television, that all changes. And that's something that we're all very excited about for both publishers and advertisers. And then finally, maybe the largest opportunity, I think, is if you look at the success that platforms like Facebook or Google have had in recent years, that success has mainly been driven by their people-based targeting approach, their ability to target people and not content. What we're doing here in connected TV is essentially giving that same targeting capability, but instead of showing an ad in front of user-generated content, whether it's a cat video or a news feed, we're now giving that targeting ability into the most premium environment, which is the largest screen in the house in front of professional content. So I think giving that ability to advertisers is just something that is going to drive more and more budgets into this space, and ultimately for publishers, it's going to be a huge opportunity to jump on. So that's kind of the background on CTV. Now, what exactly is our LiveRamp and Publica doing in this space? And really what we're doing here is combining two unique sets of capabilities, and bringing them together to realize that promise of data-driven TV that we just talked about. So LiveRamp, I'll let Naiqu say a lot more about it, but essentially their expertise is around audiences and improving ROI for advertisers through audience-enabled products. Publica is a monetization platform. We help publishers monetize their ad inventory. When you combine those two, you have access to a platform where you can maximize your monetization through the use of all sorts of audience data that we're going to talk about. So maybe I'll just start with Publica, since we're probably we are the youngest company here in the panel today, and also one that I think is growing pretty quickly. So it probably won't hurt if I just remind everybody what we do and the latest products that we have. So we're an open, transparent, connected TV ad platform. We work with publishers directly, and our goal is to maximize their revenue on their ad inventory. We essentially provide 4 key services. One is a unified auction system where we have 19 SSPs connected to the platform, and we're able to run a real-time auction between all of those bidders and deliver the highest yielding ad to the end user. We have advanced podding capabilities where we can not only run an auction at the slot level, but also at the pod level, and determine which ad can be delivered in the highest yielding available slot. Doing things like creative deduplication, that is incredibly important. If you're doing TV, you want to make sure you're not showing the same ad twice, but also things like competitive separation. So not delivering 2 auto commercials in the same ad break. So that's all what we include in the ad podding. Audience management, we're going to talk a lot about, and that's all enabled through our partnership with LiveRamp. And then server-side ad insertion is our streaming part of the business, where we essentially help publishers deliver a seamless stream to their users that contains content and ads. There's definitely a lot to say about SSAI, and not the topic of the day, so I'll just stop there. And I will hand it off to you, Naiqu, to give a little overview to everyone about what LiveRamp does.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And so for those of you who don't really know LiveRamp or just need a quick refresher, LiveRamp at its core, we are a neutral data collaboration platform that is essentially powered by best-in-class identity resolution. And so what that really means is we enable the ad tech market to better leverage identity and data in a very privacy compliant, secure, and consumer-friendly way. And so with our platform, essentially what advertisers can do is execute a bunch of these different marketing strategies across targeting and measurement for the entire ad tech ecosystem. So next one. Yeah, so here we're really trying to portray one of the biggest challenges that the TV ecosystem is currently facing, which is increased fragmentation. And so now that content is ever so distributed across devices and services, it becomes increasingly harder for marketers to really understand who is behind each individual device. And so LiveRamp, using the identity link, actually solves for that. So what we do is connect each of these disparate touch points, anonymize it for consumer safety. So you'll notice that we replace all the identifiers with IDL. And really enable marketers to more effectively then target each individual device or leverage each individual touch point using identity. And so for those who are super sharp, you've probably already picked this up, but essentially what a direct benefit of using identity link here is that we can actually enable true household-based deduplication and really being able to identify the unique households that are available, irrespective of which device is being used. So with the identity link essentially and the core LiveRamp platform, we bring a pretty compelling solution set for the TV ecosystem. For the advertisers, we really enable them to more effectively use first-party data and find the right consumers across all of their different TV viewing options. For publishers and general inventory owners across linear and OTT, we enabled them to better tap into identity resolution and leverage a lot of the integrations, the automation that we have available within our ecosystem. And for the data providers, we also support them and really enable them to bring their unique data assets into consumption for both the buy and sell side. That's it.
Cool. Thanks, Naiqu. So now that we've kind of given the introductions on what the companies do and the different product sets, we're going to start diving into the details of how do we make this happen? How do we enable TV to be a people-based medium for selling advertising? And I think before we start talking about the behind the scenes, the tech, Mike, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about, from your perspective at Newsy or at Scripps in general, how do you guys go about selling audiences today, particularly across your CTV inventory?
Yeah, absolutely. Can speak to that. So ultimately, Scripps is very keen on monetizing those 1.7 billion avails, whether it's direct or through our programmatic stack. We make all of those avails available through our programmatic stack, and they're very keen to monetize in that way. We support programmatic guaranteed deals, PMPs, et cetera. And I think, one of the things that we wanted to do beyond having in leveraging unified auction through Publica and obviously handling, pod management through Publica was also to get a sense on where we could strategically utilize, data targeting or, DMP based sets against our audience profiles. We enrich all of our ad calls with device ID, as well as geo, et cetera. So we knew that wall of inventories could apply to, some approaches around data sets and mitigating waste. And ultimately, you know, we like to balance that out. We know that we can do a number of different things beyond data, you know, content targeting, et cetera. So we are very smart to know where we can scale and cannot scale, but we knew there was an opportunity to leverage DMP-based overlays at a geo level and do so in a successful manner. And we felt like whether we were working with auto or insurance or retail or financial or QSR, et cetera, that we could bring that across to our partners, the DSPs, as well as the agency trading desks, and then, you know, upstream to agency planners and buyers amongst the holding companies. So that's been a narrative that we've gotten behind in recent months. Again, being very, very smart to balance out scale versus what I would say is a more lower funnel approach. So able to operate amongst the funnel is something we really were looking to get going. And in the last few months, we've been able to get that narrative out amongst those verticals I made mention of. The other thing we were hyper focused on was political. Obviously, Scripps has been monetizing inventories in for political cycles for quite some time. I've mentioned our assets, whether it's Newsy or Scripps Local. Those are squarely in the swing states, as well as you know, squarely able to sort of deliver on some content, as well as being able to help mitigate any waste in the political monies that are looking to target certain taxonomies, et cetera. So we've been able to handle that RFI and RFP approach. So in selling audience targeting, we really look at what's the segmentation going to look like, how are we going to scale against that segmentation, and then ultimately what's the forecasting going to look like? Because without accurate forecasting, you know, we'll be skiing over our tips, and that's not something we want to be doing, expressly when you have perishable budgets like in political that need to spend accurately and on time. So, you know, that's sort of where our head's been at, and right sizing that type of opportunity when we sell to the marketplace.
Cool, thank you. And I think you guys are in a unique position with that combination of local content and layering in audiences into that. I think that's why from my perspective, you've been so successful, particularly in this political campaign period, where you're able to deliver you know, value add to advertisers that few other publishers in this space can deliver on CTV, which is probably the most wanted device at the moment. So I think from my perspective, it's been really great to follow how you guys approach that. And yeah, thanks for sharing that with us a little bit.
Absolutely.
So behind the scenes, what I'll try to do is now take what you just described, your process for selling audiences, and explain to everyone here on the webinar what happens behind the scenes. How do we actually make that work? And essentially it comes down to 4 steps, I would say. The first one is the segmenting. So it's creating data sets, whether it's first-party data, third-party data, or advertiser first-party data. And that happens within the LiveRamp ecosystem. That's where a publisher can go to LiveRamp and start figuring out of my overall audience, what kind of segments can I identify and pockets of value that I can then sell to advertisers. Segmenting is great. You want to know how many people are in different segments and what you have in your inventory, but really what's more important is being able to say, how many ads could I deliver against those segments? So that's the forecasting piece. And that's the piece that LiveRamp and Publica worked hard on together to bring to publishers. So being able to move from a segment to a number of avails, but also, as we'll talk about, a lot of other metrics that help you make a decision on how to sell that audience. Then there's the activation. So you've identified an audience, you've determined how many avails you could sell against it. Next step is activating it, right? It's getting that deal done with the advertiser and then getting it set up in the platforms. And of course, the last one is monetize, where in real time, when a user that's part of that segment flips on the TV, they're watching Newsy, they get to an ad break, you want to make sure that you're delivering the right campaign to them at that point. So, well, that's really how we break things down in our ecosystem, and we'll go through each of these in detail. Just before we do, I just wanted to clarify the types of data we're talking about. Essentially, we break it down into 3 different verticals. The publisher first party data, so that's anything that the publisher owns, usually things like viewership based audiences. If it's newsy, you know, it could be someone that's watching the business news segment every day. That could be a business news watcher. That's the kind of data we're talking about. Advertiser first party data is data that comes from the advertiser that is going to get pushed to LiveRamp in different ways. So that could be, you know, customers that have already bought a product or that are returning or intention-based audiences. And finally, what we group in the third-party data category is any data that's coming from a third-party provider that is not the advertiser or the publisher. And that's enabled all through the LiveRamp data marketplace, where they basically aggregate all the data sources and make that available. So this is usually where a lot of political spend comes from, is against third-party data. And having said that, I'll turn it over to you, Naiqu, to tell us a little bit about how do publishers get started. You know, if we're taking Mike's example of, I want to sell audiences to a political buyer, what's the first step?
Yeah, for sure. So let me kind of kick off the overview of the more detailed product integration. So this is our core platform, Connect. All the existing LiveRamp customers, whether it's advertisers, agencies, data providers, or publishers, all do have access to this. And here is where the matching process would essentially happen. So you as a customer would send us a list, from the data sets that we mentioned earlier. And that's where we then tap into the identity graph and enable that to get resolved into identity links and make it ready for activation. Super straightforward. I wanted to make a quick call out on some of the data provider categories. Advertiser data is pretty straightforward, but people often get tripped up a little bit on third-party data sources. And so, for those who aren't really familiar with our data marketplace, we essentially enable super easy and turnkey methods to directly access hundreds of different data providers across dozens of verticals. And so here we're listing out a sample set of some data providers that are part of the marketplace that you generally cannot obtain anywhere else. And so through the Connect platform, as you go through identity resolution, you are also able to join these data sets together in terms of audiences and make that ready for use. Additionally, we also have a dedicated audience solutions team that can actually help with a bunch of recommendations. So if you're in trouble or not really sure how to what sort of audiences you should be using, we have a bunch of experts that can help with that. Then I wanted to make a really explicit call out on our research partnership with Comscore. So, many of you have probably heard of a large partnership with Comscore around viewership data. And one of the ways that we, with Comscore intend to bring it to the programmatic space is really enabling a lot of their custom high value audiences to be used and leveraged. So, as we all know, Comscore has a really market leading position and a market leading panel, and they would be able to curate a certain subset of audiences for really creative use cases across TV. So one example that I'll highlight that is pretty top of mind is suppose as an advertiser you really want to find those consumers that don't watch a lot of linear TV. They're underexposed on linear, and so you want to send that same message to your users on cord cutters essentially. And so we can include an audience of those underexposed folks and really port that over and activate it on an OTT publisher. And the inverse is obviously also possible. So suppose you have heavy watchers and you want to suppress those in OTT. That is also possible. So basically, there's a lot of creative different ways that we can make data useful. And so actually making it useful, again, is super, super straightforward. In the next slide, Ben, essentially, to port over the first party audiences, we just have to find the first party tile within Publica's destination. Again, for those who are familiar, this basically functions exactly the same as any other LiveRamp integration. And so if you're an advertiser who wants to port first party data, or a publisher, you can redirect them to go through this flow. And it's very similar for third party as well. Basically just identify the tiles.
Yep. All right, so you've identified your segments, you've pushed the data over to Publica. Now, step 2 is the part where you need to actually create the segment within the Publica UI. So I think on this webinar, there's a number of people that are using the platform, so you're probably already familiar with this, but for those who have not seen this before, so once you've pushed a segment into Publica, you're going to navigate to the Audience Manager tab in the Publica UI. And from there, you're going to be able to identify all of the audiences that have been created and pushed to your account. You can create any type of targeting logic with and or negative targeting. So you can create combinations of segments, which could be really interesting depending on what the advertiser RFP is.
Yeah, and I think the targeting options, just from a publisher standpoint, you need to be nimble and flexible as it relates to the RFIs and RFPs are coming in. So that feature we've used over and over again. It's been very valuable to be able to do that and sort of curate your value proposition to the end advertiser. So we point that out as being something that is very strategic in terms of getting across not only the ability to mitigate but also to scale at the same time.
And I think the other part that actually I know Newsy has used a lot is the forecasting. So once you've created all those segments and targeting logics, you want to know how much inventory you have against it. So that's in our forecasting tool. So this forecasting tool is essentially going to show you 5 data points. One is how many uniques you have over a certain period in general. The forecasted reach for the audience segment that you've created. So how many users are in that segment. The available inventory. So here, obviously, we look at essentially the number of ad breaks because we do things like, knowing that we're not going to deliver multiple of the same ads in a pod. We're going to look at the ad break and not every single ad slot. But also, I think what part of the data that is really interesting to publishers is the CPM that those impressions were monetized at without any audience targeting. So that kind of acts as a baseline for if you're creating a PMP with a buyer, not to price it under your eCPM for those users. And I think that's really important because a lot of times publishers are creating deals, but they really have no idea how to price it, and it ends up being kind of driven by the buy side. With this type of forecasting tool, now you're able to know, okay, I know that I can't make a deal under a certain price to make it relevant. Once you forecasted the deal, created the segments, you can then activate it in 2 different ways in the Publica platform, either programmatically through deal ID. So you can create a deal ID and pass that on to any of the SSPs that are connected to your account. That's really probably the most standard way of activating things. You can also target the audience segments either for if you have a direct campaign in Publica or a VAST tag or anything that you really, however you're getting the demand to activate, you can target against your audience segment, which basically just means that Publica is going to only call that demand partner when the user is part of the audience. And really, you're done. That's all it takes is and what I was thinking of doing is a little recap for people on this webinar to understand a little bit about the workflow and how it all works. So I won't get too technical in this one, but I'll try to walk you through kind of the journey of what happens from start to finish. So if you're not very technical, hang tight. This should not last very long. If you're interested in the technical aspects, I think that this is pretty relevant. So I'm a user. I am flipping on my Roku device, for example, turning on to Newsy, watching content, and then I hit an ad break. So first, when you flip to Newsy, what happens is the video player makes a request to the SSAI server, basically requesting a stream, a video stream. The SSAI is going to deliver the content stream. When you get to an ad break, that SSAI server is going to make an ad request to an ad server. So here we're going to take the example that the ad server is Publica. Within Publica, we are going to run an OpenRTB auction between any of the SSPs that are connected, but also call any direct campaigns. So if the device ID of the user is part of an audience segment, we're going to enrich those bid requests to the SSPs with the appropriate signal saying, hey, this user is part of the audience XYZ, for example. Or if you're trafficking a direct campaign, we'll only call the direct campaign when that device ID is part of the audience. We call the buy side, we get the ads back, and that's where Publica applies all of its dedupe logic, constructs the ad break, sends it back to the SSAI server. The SSAI server is going to transcode the ads and ideally have them pre-transcoded to insert into the stream and deliver that to the user. So from the end user perspective, it's a very seamless process. Obviously from an ad tech perspective, there's a lot of things going on to make all that happen. All right, and that I will stop there and not get into more technical details that would bore most people on this call. And really look at, I think, something that's way more interesting, which is what's coming next. And Naiqu, I'll turn it over to you to get.
Yeah, you know, we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about what we have today, and it's really, I'm really happy to see kind of the progress that we've made with integration. But as most people probably are most curious is what do we have planned for the future? I think we have a lot of you know, key innovations that we are going to be investing in. And so if you hop over to the next slide, let's actually, you know, list some of these out. At our core, like with our joint partnership, you know, we really want to ensure between LiveRamp and Publica that the, you know, OTT campaign activation process across the board is going to be improved between both the buy side and the sell side through the inclusion, you know, of data and identity. And so here are kind of the three key pillars of investment that we are really looking forward to bringing to, you know, the entire ecosystem. And I'll walk through the first one, which is really a buy-side discovery tool. So from our perspective, you know, we really want to be able to enable frictionless access for the buy side to really, you know, find programmatic inventory. This OTT is kind of the talk of the town, and everybody is eager to find and procure inventory, and we want to make it easier so that, you know, you don't have to do too much legwork yourself. And so since LiveRamp already works with, you know, most of the, you know, major advertisers and agency holding companies in the ecosystem, we want to enable them to more flexibly be able to browse and discover publishers while also, you know, directly initiating RFPs to, you know, a pub like Newsy. And we certainly want to make sure that, you know, all the publishers are going to be able to, you know, more directly receive this inbound demand, and that the buyers, you know, kind of have the flexibility to find and utilize data more effectively. And to really make that happen, we obviously want to enhance it with more effective forecasting. So yeah, Ben, maybe you can share more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you have to have the best forecasting available on the market in order to have a product that both buyers and sellers are going to use. And you know, to enable what you just described, Naiqu, what we clearly realized very quickly is that you have to have instant forecasting. You can't wait a couple days to know, you know, how big is an audience across these publishers, and how much could I spend as a buyer, or how much can I sell as a seller. So instant forecasting has been really a pillar of our strategy with LiveRamp. What we are going to be rolling out very soon is the ability for both the sell side and buy side to automatically forecast in real time any combination of audience. So again, with the and or and any type of exclusion, you'll be able to know immediately how many users are in the pool, how many avails that represent, how many impressions can I deliver against them. And with this buy-side gallery and instant forecasting, the logical next step for us was to work on automated deal creation. Obviously, I think everyone in this webinar and in this panel are big believers in programmatic as a means of selling. And the promise of programmatic is automation. If you're doing all this, but you still have to make a phone call and get an IO and sign things, it's going to be very slow, and adoption is going to be very low. So what we worked on is an automated deal creation process where, whether initiated by a buyer or a seller, there's an automated matchmaking platform. All this does is basically send a notification to a buyer and a seller that there is interest. Once the match has been done, we created a way to automatically push a deal ID to any platform. For LiveRamp and Publica, it's extremely important to be platform agnostic and to work with anybody in the space. So what we did here is give the ability to create deals through any platform, whether it's an SSP on the sell side or a DSP on the buy side. And once those deals are created, obviously the workflow that we've just talked about for activation and monetization are exactly the same way. So those are just three elements that are coming out really soon and available on the LiveRamp and Publica platforms. But I think before we hand it off to Q&A, Mike, I'd be really curious to get your take on, this is kind of what we're working on right now. What do you think is missing? If you were to challenge us, what do you think we should work on next? What's needed from your perspective?
I mean, I look at the journey of just Scripps as it relates to our CTV monetization. And, there are things that have benefited us greatly. Obviously, server-side unified auction, getting into what we talked about around pod management, deduplication, competitive separation. Those are all things that service not only the buy side, but also, as a publisher, you want to be very, very close to the experience of the consumer, right? So those are things that we continue to look at, make sure that we have great engagement rates and time spent on our platforms, Newsy, Scripps Local, across all of our portfolio. I think on the monetization side, a few challenges I think that come up. Forecasting is key, and you've made mention of that. Being able to go upstream to planners, not only on the programmatic side, but just on the brand side of things, and have accurate estimations of audience, especially if you're going to be using some DMPs to sort of mitigate any of the waste that may be conceivable. That's certainly something that needs to continue to ramp, so that folks feel very safe with the amount of money they may be spending, whether it is PMP or programmatic guaranteed, right? So there are challenges there that I think we can continue to do better on the forecasting side. I also think that on the KPI side of things, right? We're looking for results from these type of tactics that we go after, and to have a sense of device tracking to see if KPI actually does come out, whether it's at a URL or it's footfall traffic, et cetera. Those are pieces of the programmatic landscape around CTV that I think will continue to evolve, so that brands feel like the investments that they're making are translating to mid-funnel to bottom line, mid-funnel or lower funnel based KPI results. So I think those are things we can be looking at to fill in the blanks. Ultimately, we're trying to stay as close to a balance from the buy side as well as the sell side in terms of best practices, and that's where Scripps is going to focus our time, on emerging tech and making sure that we're putting the best portfolio out there for investors to feel good about.
Couldn't agree more on the ROI part of things. I think all of this only makes sense if it increases ROI, right? And the first thing we need is measurement of that ROI to continue to improve, because then I think it's going to make everything else a lot easier if it's very clear for advertisers that there's an incentive to buy this type of inventory.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, certainly. I think in our next iteration of the webinar, when we do the grand unveil, we should definitely talk about how we layer in some of the measurement. I think like LiveRamp and Publica can jointly come up with something really good, especially given our expertise with some of the linear and OTT measurement that Data Plus Math can offer. So.
Yeah, exciting times.
That's for the next one.
Yep.
That's right. Stay tuned.
Well, listen, thanks for that, guys. Really interesting discussion so far. So throughout the webinar, I've been trying to take some notes of the incoming questions. I don't think we can get through all of them because there's quite a few, but we're certainly going to follow up afterwards and make sure that we answer all of them. So what I've done, I've just picked out several for each of you that I think are pertinent to today's discussion. Naiqu, the first is actually for you guys. Is this partnership geo-specific? Does it work in the US or is it global at the moment?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I'm really glad that there's kind of global interest just based on judging by the question. So, LiveRamp and Publica are both global entities. We operate and have offices across the world. For kind of the introductory version of this partnership, because we definitely wanted to, have a focused scope. We are doing this today just within the United States. But once we prove out the value of the integration and as we kind of, continue investing in some of the functionalities that we mentioned, we're taking really hard looks even right now to figure out how we can bring this globally. And, my guess right now is like we're looking really hard in the EU, and that's probably going to be our first kind of area of expansion. And yeah, if you're interested, definitely drop us a line and we'll figure it out.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Naiqu. Mike, one question now for you guys. Somebody's asked, is it too late to pick up political ad budgets on CTV? Have they missed the boat?
I would say no, absolutely not. I think that it's certainly getting tight, but there are a lot of strategies, I think, on the publisher side where, folks are looking at October to be a very big month for political. We certainly are. And we feel like we're in a great position to take advantage of that. I do believe there's still time to get in. We're seeing ebbs and flows from both sides of the aisle, not only at the presidential election, but also in congressional and senatorial, and then even still issue-based coming through. So yeah, from that perspective, I think there's still time to jump in and be strategic about getting that money.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Mike. Ben, somebody's taken the time to type out a rather long question, so I'm going to try and dissect it. Is there a danger that too much data may actually drive down yield for CTV publishers? I think somebody's trying to articulate the point that TV has pretty much been an upper funnel platform thus far. With the evolution of data and addressable TV, does that turn the environment more into a DR kind of place for advertisers?
Got it. Yeah. So I think I understand the question. And I think it's a very valid question for people that have been in the TV industry for a long time. I think maybe companies like us that come from the digital tend to forget that TV is a great place to raise brand awareness, right? And you're going to you're going to broadcast a message to a massive audience, and that's going to get people talking about what you're doing and buying your product. So there could be a little bit of concern about, well, okay, so we're going to segment this audience and now we're going to target people, but are we going to lose that upper funnel strategy in TV? And is that a concern, right? I think my point of view on that is TV is not going to change. It's going to remain absolutely a great way to raise brand awareness and to reach a massive scale, right? What we're suggesting here is that instead of having the same message to everyone, a brand can now adjust their message to who's watching. And I think any advertiser would understand the value of that, right? If you're running a Super Bowl commercial and you know, it's a halftime commercial and you just want to blast your message everywhere, wouldn't you want to be able to tailor that message to who's watching, if they're in a bar, in a house, and you know, where they're at in their lives, with what they're looking to do or buy? I think giving that ability to advertisers is going to be not only a great thing in terms of ROI for the buyers, and obviously a great thing for the seller as well, because it's going to increase the value of each user and overall increase the value of the transaction. So I think it's going to be a good thing for the TV ecosystem without necessarily changing the fundamentals of the industry. Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that, Ben. Naiqu, question for you guys. Somebody wants to know whether or not what you guys are doing, is it looking to replace what is currently available via SSPs and DSPs when it comes to audience segmentation and targeting?
Yeah. So it's a good question. It's definitely a good question. That the short answer is no, but I want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more. You know, LiveRamp, we are a neutral platform. We don't own media. You know, we don't sell news inventory. We also don't actually own the third-party data inside of the data marketplace. We are really just processing that, and we certainly don't execute on media. And so, you know, our role, again, as I alluded to at the beginning, is really around data collaboration with identity resolution. And so what we want to do is connect the entire ecosystem together. And so, you know, for this particular solution, we are really looking just to enhance kind of the discoverability of data, making it easier to use data as part of campaigns, and make it more frictionless to actually activate, so that, you know, you don't worry about the day-to-day operations, and rather just kind of like, you know, curate the best kind of marketing messages or produce the best content. And so, you know, the sell side with the publishers, they can still leverage, you know, whichever SSP relationship that they want. You know, Publica, like LiveRamp, also has all of these integrations available. And certainly the activation of that from the buy side is also, you know, done through the DSP. And so in that sense, again, we view ourselves as a connector, and certainly not in it to disintermediate everybody.
Perfect. Okay, so very much an agnostic point of view.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Mike, somebody's asking whether or not more data has enabled you guys or the sales team to sell more programmatic guaranteed bookings when it comes to the CTV inventory that you're selling to the agencies.
Yeah, you know, I could use political as a use case. We certainly have seen some PG business that we probably would have not come upon without having some data sets involved. So I would say yes, it's been a creative endeavor for us as it relates to PG. You know, still we got a good balance, I think, in terms of the types of protocols and tactics that we're using. We have a lot of always on deals as well, where we can enrich that process too, in terms of advertisers that want to spend outside of the guaranteed funnel. So our political investments outside the guaranteed funnel. So there's a good balance of both, but yes, it's been a creative for sure.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you very much for that, guys. As I said, there's quite a few questions that have come through, and in the interest of time, I think we're just going to follow up with everybody individually after the call. But again, thank you for everybody that's dialed in. Thank you to our panelists.